Hey, everybody. Welcome to this edition of The Strategic Thinker. I'm Dr. John Meis, and I'm here with Drew Schaefer. Drew, how you doing?
Great. How are you doing, Dr. Meis?
I'm doing fantastic. We've got a topic that we need to talk about now and then. It's not the most comfortable topic in the world, but it's a really important one because it affects pretty much every single dental practice. And that topic is embezzlement and theft. And so as we look at what's happening right now in the current economy, we know that we have inflationary pressure on prices. Fuel prices are going up dramatically. There's a lot of uncertainty. People's confidence about their financial wherewithal is less. And so I think that people that work for us are going to be having some financial pressure that they haven't had for some time. And so knowing that, we know that that is one of the risk factors for starting to have a greater risk of theft. So what are some of the other risk factors that you see going on besides the general economy?
Yeah, I mean, there are always those risk factors as far as when somebody's going through trouble at home, whether it's a spouse losing a job, marital issues to where somebody's now a solo income household, gambling issues. Those factors are always there, which is why there's always been embezzlement and fraud and theft.
Yeah.
But to your point, Dr. John, it's even more pressure now. There's been, I know we've all been increasing our wages, but the expenses are outpacing that. And so much so that I have a friend that runs a construction company and says, well, the no-shows are down a lot. Everybody has to show up a lot more. This is an industry that has a lot more no-shows.
Yeah.
To fill up their gas tanks, they have to work now. So there's hearing these types of stories, there's pressures on everybody. And dentistry has just historically been one of those industries that has been really susceptible to embezzlement.
Yeah. Another one that I would add to that list significantly, and it's rising numbers everywhere, and that's addiction. And so people that are in desperate positions do desperate things. And in one breath, theft is wrong. It's a crime. It's bad. But occasionally people get into such awful circumstances that they need to do that to feed their kids, right? And any one of us in that awful situation might be tempted. So what we want to talk about is really how to spot it, how to remove temptation, first of all, how to spot it, and to talk about some of the things that you can do to protect yourself without giving anybody who's in that desperate situation any ideas as to how specifically to do it. Does that make sense, Drew?
Yep.
All right, awesome. So I've always thought of you as kind of an embezzlement whisperer. As you were the controller at a large DSO, you were able to spot when people were stealing, and really, with given what I thought was a pretty small amount of information, you could figure out how they were doing it. So you really have a good sense of sniffing this out. And so why don't you want to go through some of the things that are kind of the red flags that something's going on that you look for?
Yeah, I think everybody assumes that it's just cash coming in the door. That's their biggest risk. That's probably the most common one. That's the easiest one to do. But that's probably the lowest impact of a lot of the strategies you see. I think typically when you start seeing cash is not being deposited in within kind of your process or procedure as it's defined by your organization, whether that's to be deposited daily or the next day, when people aren't following that process, it's starting to raise some red flags, and there's an excuse every time as to why they couldn't make it to the bank. I think
cash sitting around is certainly a risk factor, right? So
yeah,
you want to get
not just for employees, but if you have a cleaning crew come through,
right.
we've actually had that to where there was over $1,000 in the cash drawer. The cleaning crew comes through and cleans it out. So it's not just internally your people, but if it's not locked away, or if there's not a process, it's going to walk away sooner or later. As it pertains to credit cards, this is one that I think people take for granted. anybody can set up a credit card processing account. There are some that are smarter than others, and I won't get into details on how you do it better to hide it better. But if individuals are paying by credit card, or if insurance companies are paying on a card, if it's not up at the front desk and full visibility of everybody, especially if it's one of those things where they take it to the back or out of the view, a lot of different things can happen to that, and the patient gets charged or the insurance company gets charged, so that there's no questions on their ends. It's just not in your bank. And then lastly, insurance payments that come through on check or personal checks that come through. Bank accounts can be set up very deceptively to where those checks can be deposited to accounts other than your practice's accounts. And once again, the payer pays. There's no questions on their end. If you don't have some practices and checks and balances on your end, it goes into a black hole.
Yeah. So fairly easy to do all those things. And so what are the things that you're looking for? Certainly taking things off the front desk out of you to process. And what are some of the things that you look for that make you suspicious?
Yeah, I think with the credit cards or the bank accounts, those especially, you'll see a lot of deleted payments. Maybe they'll put on a payment for the patient, print out the statement, and then as soon as the patient leaves, they'll delete it out and write it off. So if you're running some reports as far as deleted payments, write-offs, those are going to be some big red flags for you in that respect. And really one of the biggest red flags is I'm producing more and more every year, but there's less money in my bank. for those practices that manage more by the balance in their bank account, it's very common to feel like they're working harder and harder, but have less to show for it. And that's a huge red flag. Yeah.
And we have done other episodes on that flaw in thinking, that as your organization gets bigger, the checking account balance becomes less and less meaningful as a measure of business success. Because we can, first of all, people often put having a true financial statement, a true profit and loss statement, is a much better way of doing that. But it's a common shortcut, and it's one of those financial mental models that works when you're really small, but as you get bigger, that starts to fail you. And the biggest effect that I see is it makes people lose their confidence. They confuse balance sheet items and P&L items, and all of a sudden they don't have any cash and they don't think they're making any money. And so we've done an episode or two on that in the past. So, but certainly, particularly if you have good, timely financial statements and you see that you're producing more and having less profitability, we got to dig in and figure out why, because that's not the way it goes. Usually an additional dollar adds an additional 50 cents in profitability. So we got to figure out if it's off from that, we need to figure out why.
Right.
All right. So other ways that we've seen, other places, I guess, to look is being cautious about payroll. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we can have some checks and balances there?
Yeah, especially in smaller organizations, I think it's easier to filter everything through one or two people. Just you have fewer resources. You're busy in the day with patient care, so you can't have checks and balances as much. But I think if you kind of take your eye off payroll, if it's one person that's initiating the payroll with a third party provider, they could be giving themselves pay rate increases. Another even bigger issue is putting family members or friends on payroll. And if you're not just minimally looking at the payroll report after each payroll is run, which would take all of 3 minutes, it's a really easy check to put in place. And as far as having any pay rate changes or new people added, just having that third-party provider make you the approver of that, even if somebody else initiates it, just be the approver of it can save a lot of money. We've seen frauds that have gone on for years like this that have been in the high six figures as far as the amount of embezzlement that was done from something as simple as that.
And, you think that somebody has to be really stupid to be missing that amount, but people who aren't financially aware, who aren't looking at their profit and loss statements, aren't looking at their payroll, aren't looking at their account adjustments list, and maybe you don't have to do it every day, but your team should be thinking you're doing it every day, and you should be doing it regularly to watch for things that are off. So what are some of the other things, Drew, that you think are good practices to help avoid embezzlement and theft?
I think the last one is as far as your accounts payable process, whether you use checks or credit cards, making sure that you or somebody very responsible in the place is signing the checks, not leaving blank signed checks around for others to fill out, so it's easier from an administrative purpose. From a credit card perspective, keeping a monitor on those. Similar to setting up a credit card processor for accepting patient payments or insurance payments, you can also, I've also seen that done where an account is created and then the office card is run on that, which is another way to filter money out there. You have very common now with Amazon or some of these huge vendors where you get a lot of stuff from. If you're not looking at the detail, once again, not for every expense, but just doing a simple audit of a few larger transactions every month and making sure all the vendors that are coming through make sense. This is true for any industry. It's very common in fraud to set up fake vendors and filter money out that way.
Yep. Yeah, very good. The another one that we haven't mentioned is that we talked a little bit about cash, but also cash equivalents in the offices, things like gift cards. Make sure we have a process for tracking the use of those. And one of the things we haven't talked about is if you have some tracking mechanism, number one, you need someone who's keeping an eye on the people who are doing it, right? This is at least a 2-person process,
right?
And some of these things, we have not seen that many thefts that were a group of people doing it. Most of the theft that you and I have experienced has been individuals. So just having 2 people checking it, even if it's not you, having 2 people check it is certainly an improvement. With an every once in a while kind of a deep dive to look through it. So, and my belief, Drew, is that every single dental practice gets stolen from in some way, right? So it's maybe milking the clock, maybe taking supplies home.
Exactly.
I think everybody does it, and I think getting that to 0 is probably impossible. But can we reduce it to the degree possible? So if someone suspects that they've got something going on, what are some things that they can do to create some clarity about is it, isn't it, and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is to not accuse anybody, not jump out there, which we really don't see much in dentistry. I think being very much a relationship based industry, we actually typically see the opposite, where we cater to the benefit of the doubt to our own detriment and almost turn a blind eye. But at the end of the day, turning a blind eye won't resolve your situation. So depending on what type of fraud it is, I think it's important to keep the discussion confined to as few people as possible in case there are others that are complicit. And really just do an audit of what they have access to and control over. If it's on collections, looking at the write-offs, the deleted payments, overall collection percentage, seeing if your AR is just growing. Whatever it is, have a good body of evidence over several months, and then that'll really kind of define the discussion that you're going to have. Once again, being relationship, I see a lot of organizations just quietly part ways with individuals. I personally think that they're just going to go down the road and do that to somebody else. So from a collegial standpoint, I wouldn't want any other provider or company to do that to me. So I think if there isn't some sort of repercussions, they won't change. Their financial stress won't change. But ultimately, that's each individual's decision, and typically it's largely based off the relationship, the length of that, and any other implications in the practice.
One of the really horrible things about being embezzled is it's often your most trusted employee. It's often the person who's been with you for the longest time. We have an example in our history, Drew, that where it was somebody that they knew for a long time, that babysat their kids, sat in the pew behind them at church. They just had this such a close personal relationship, and so it can really be devastating when you find out. Another red flag that we didn't mention is anybody who knows how to do one thing and won't let anybody in, won't let anybody see what they're doing, doesn't train anybody. That is a red flag that we've got. We really have a control balance off, and
Right.
when that happens, embezzlement is more likely to happen. And so really the things that we can look for, I think you did a great job covering that. So if we find one, there is professional help that can be gotten. I know that you do have a history of forensic accounting and have helped clients of ours dig into places. There's also a website with some resources called prosperident.com. Our friend David Harris there, they are kind of a embezzlement prevention group. And if you don't think this is happening very often, you can go to their site and you can see their wall of shame, which they put up the pictures and names of people that they have caught, and it's there's hundreds of people on there. It's really unfortunate, and but it's the reality, and it's cost of doing business, and we just have to be prepared, and we have to act, even though sometimes it's very tough. So how about a lot of people think about just wanting it to go away quietly because it's so personally painful. Other people want to press charges. So what's your thought on the two? There's kind of two bookends of the behaviors that we see from people who actually catch somebody.
Yeah, like I said, I think typically the decision is driven by the relationship. At the end of the day, if I had a very long-standing relationship with somebody that took advantage of me, took that personal bond and used it against me, not out of revenge or anything, but I think that relationship for me personally would be a non-existent barrier. I think if charges aren't pressed, they're just going to go somewhere else and do the same, to where even if you don't give them a bad review, if somebody solicits you, at least it's on their record. So if somebody else goes and does a background check, which is something we didn't mention, but probably should be done for any key financial roles that you have in your organization, at least that's out there as a red flag for future companies. And it won't prevent them necessarily from getting another job, just not in a key financial role to where they could perpetuate it.
Yeah. And when you look on the wall of shame, you'll see people on there multiple times getting caught. So it is definitely a pattern for some people. So yeah. All right. So if you are concerned about embezzlement, you think that you have it, or you want some guidance on putting some processes in place in order to prevent that, you can call the Spark office, and they will help you get lined up with Drew. The Spark number is 866-277-2758. Drew, thanks a bunch. I think this is it's a kind of a bummer of a topic to talk about, but it's really important because we've seen, like you said, seven-figure thefts, and that is a very, very painful lesson to learn. So hopefully we'll help people identify it and prevent it, and keep the temptation away from your team. Anything else, Drew?
No, I think you
All right.
covered it great.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, everybody, for being on this edition of The Strategic Thinker, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.